So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the motifs of the trickster archetype. This is a fairly long list, as you can see on the slide. And one of the things that I think would be helpful is if you keep these motifs in mind while you're reading the ancient myths that are in your textbook. So let's go through them, and I'm going to see if I can hopefully explain them a little bit more fully. The first one is fairly easy. Tricksters in ancient myths are almost always male, but like all of the gods, they shapeshift, and so they can change genders. They can even change their physical form from human to animal. And this means that, for example, Loki is who he is, but he can also take the form of a giantess or a female cow. In modern myths, one of the things that I like about tricksters is that we have female tricksters, and one of the most, I think, recent examples in popular culture is Harley Quinn. But we've got lots of female tricksters, and we see them in modern children's books as well. Madeline is personally one of my favorites. Eloise is another one. The second motif is that tricksters live outside the community. And what that means is that tricksters don't inhabit the world of the gods, but they also don't live among humans. This is why often they're messenger gods. They go back and forth. They don't really live anywhere. Or sometimes, like Hermes, they live in a cave apart from both humans and the gods. And that's because this acknowledged the idea that trickery is everywhere and can come at any moment from anywhere. You can't always see it coming, and you're not familiar with it because you don't live with it next door to it, for example. The third motif is that tricksters are motivated by their appetites and desires. And what we mean by that is that tricksters are like children. They are childlike and childish, and so they act on their impulses. Or they're animal-like, and like animals, they act on when they're hungry, or they do things motivated by greed or by laziness. And so tricksters will never be mature. They don't reason very well. They always are impulse-driven and impulsive. Next, tricksters are clever and resourceful. They're not always very smart. So one funny example from cartoons is Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. Wile E. Coyote is always devising these elaborate plans to try to catch the Roadrunner, and invariably these plans literally blow up in his face. This is pretty typical with tricksters. They're clever, they're resourceful, they hatch these sometimes very elaborate plans to get what they want, but they're not very smart about it, and so usually or often the prank blows up. They become the butt of their own jokes. Tricksters are representative of disruption. They are not just characters that disrupt things. They are symbolic of the disruptions in life and in society and the world. So tricksters always violate the normal order of things. And that's why tricksters are very often associated with chaos in society or in politics. Disease, for example, or war, or misunderstandings that cause fights. These are all the work of tricksters. They are agents of change as well as symbolic of change. And so when things happen like a king dies and a new king rises, or when one generation shifts to another and nothing is quite as it used to be, that's the trickster. This is why they're also often gods of crossroads. We see this with a lot of sub-Saharan African trickster gods. They are the gods of crossroads because they represent this idea that the future is hazy and elusive, and we can't predict what will happen, and that in and itself is a trickster thing. Tricksters also refuse to comply with the community. They never obey authority. And sometimes at the end of a story, a trickster like Dennis the Menace or Madeline or Loki will get a comeuppance, but they start their tricks in the next story, and so it just continues on and on and on, because trickery lives forever, and trickery is always about not obeying, not going along with what other people expect. So tricksters will never obey unless it's in their personal interest to do so. Tricksters play tricks and pranks, and often these are fairly mild and benign. Occasionally they can be quite cruel, but the tricks that Hermes plays, for instance, actually sometimes bring out something good. Hermes' tricks lead to the invention of sandals and the lyre. Loki is one of the more cruel of the tricksters, and his trickery actually results in the death of Balder the Beautiful, and his punishment is equally cruel. You'll read that and we'll talk some more about it a little bit further on. Tricksters also can become the butt of their own jokes and tricks, and this happens frequently because, as I said earlier, they're not that smart. So the trickster will plan something and then nothing quite works out the way they had planned that to be. And that in itself is a good lesson for us as well. We can make plans, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. And that's kind of the idea with tricksters. Tricksters are sometimes folk heroes. They can bring good things like the sandals or fire or the lyre to people. Prometheus steals fire from Mount Olympus and brings it to humans. But when tricksters do this, they're not doing this to be good, and they're not doing this because they necessarily love humanity. They do this because it serves their own purpose. Prometheus is a really good example of this. He brings fire to humans, and he becomes a really popular folk hero for doing so. But he does it primarily because he wants to pull one over on Zeus. And so tricksters can be cultural heroes, and sometimes we like them because they help us. And sometimes we like them because, as I said in an earlier slide, we like the bad boys. We like villains. So we are very fond of them. But you must always remember that the trickster is never going to be under your control. Trickery is never something you can control. Sometimes it works for you, and sometimes it doesn't. In the next few slides, we're going to start looking at some ancient and modern examples of trickster, both included in your textbook and also in popular culture.